Hello everybody, on behalf of Centrify I would like to welcome you to today's What Should Work session titled Secure Access for Remote Admins and Third-Party Vendors. Together with my colleague Tony Golding, I will be guiding you through this meeting. Whether they are employees, outsourced IT, vendors, or managed service providers, granting remote administrators privileged access to your infrastructure introduces tremendous risk. In this session, you will learn how to use federated privileged access for third parties, targeted access to infrastructure without a VPN, and host enforced privilege elevation to minimize your risk exposure. We initially talk about the latest outsourcing trends and their associated risk. Afterwards, we will illustrate the shortcomings of VPNs and then provide you with 6 steps to secure remote access. And as seeing is believing, Tony will take us through a demo. Outsourcing is no longer something that a subset of organizations pursues, but has become mainstream. Matter of fact, every organization outsources at least some of their IT. When doing so, organizations granting privileged access to not only their remote workers, but also outsourced vendors. So this trend won't stop anytime soon. Further growth is expected for outsourcing your business operations, your IT, and other parts. And while many organizations are facing an onslaught of cyber attacks that result in breaches, like 66% of organizations are facing this almost on a daily basis, it is really important to understand where is this coming from. When you do post-mortem analysis, you will find out that privileged access abuse is the #1 cause for today's data breaches, meaning making up 80% of all hacking-related data breaches today. That's a huge number. And remote access has become a new attack vector for hackers, as a recent alert from the FBI illustrates. So they send out, together with the Department of Homeland Security, an alert to all organizations warning them that they have seen an uptick in hackers leveraging remote access to gain access to networks and then do lateral movements. So that's a big exclamation point right here. So if you haven't paid much attention to remote access in the past, you should be doing that going forward. And really, let's remember, as privileged credentials are representing the key to the kingdom, it only takes one compromised privileged credential to impact millions. A good example is Target. The data breach originated with a phishing attack on a third-party vendor. Malware harvested credentials, which subsequently were used to enter Target's Ariba portal. That's their vendor portal. And from there, lateral movements led to placing malware onto the POS system, extracting credit card data of more than 110 million customers. Not only lost Target its CEO, but more importantly, the breach led to significant financial losses. Now you could argue that for remote access, organizations should leverage VPNs to increase their security posture. However, is this really sufficient? To enable remote workers, IT outsources and partners to safely access corporate resources, organizations have historically relied on virtual private networks, or VPNs. The problem with VPNs, however, is that once inside, the user has access to the entire network. You see that on the top image of the slide. This introduces a significant level of risk. In addition, VPNs can be operationally complex and expensive to maintain. I still remember all the calls that I placed into our IT hotline when it came to VPNs. They're really inconvenient for users. They're requiring a series of manual, time-consuming steps to enter credentials and to initiate the session. The advent of cloud, bring your own device, and virtualization technologies have expanded an already difficult attack surface to protect. So while authentication with a username and password is required to establish a VPN connection, attackers can compromise these connections and inject malware onto the remote systems. By hacking remote access sessions, malicious actors can compromise the identities, steal login credentials, and exfiltrate other sensitive information. So what is highly recommended is really that you provide targeted VPN-less access. And that's the second diagram shown here on the slide, where you really give only access directly, let's say, to a specific server and not to the entire network segment. And so that completely changes then your risk exposure. So to minimize the risk associated with remote access threats, organizations should really implement 6 best practices to strengthen their security posture. So what are these 6 best practices? Let's look. So the first step is really all about federated access, which assures portability of identity information across otherwise autonomous security domains. The ultimate goal of identity federation is to enable users of one domain to securely access data or systems of another domain seamlessly and without the need for completely redundant user administrations. And Tony will demonstrate that a little bit later. The second step is the use of risk-based multi-factor authentication. So to further enhance security, organizations should combine risk and role-based access controls, user context, and multi-factor authentication. This approach enables intelligent, automated, and real-time decisions for granting privileged access to users who are remotely accessing servers, on password checkout, or when using a shared account to log into remote systems. The third best practice is really password checkout and rotation. So when sharing passwords, it's highly recommended to use a vault that holds the password. The remote user would check out the password, and once done with the job, the password is rotated. So the fourth step would be granting access to specific resources, not the entire network. Unlike a VPN that gives users visibility into the entire network, privileged access management solutions can be used to limit access to assets on a per-resource basis. These proxy-based technologies give an organization's privileged internal IT admins access to as much of infrastructure as necessary, while limiting access by an outsourced team or remote workers to only the servers and network hardware their role requires. In combination with access zones, this security practice significantly reduces the risk of lateral attacks. As a fifth step, it's all about granting least privilege. Considering the high percentage of privileged access misuse, we talked about 80% of today's breaches being related to that, it is essential to limit access and privilege using a zero-trust security approach. This entails establishing granular role-based access controls via access zones to limit lateral movement, as well as just enough and just-in-time privilege to applications and infrastructure. For example, if an outsourced IT provider is contracted to maintain an Oracle database, their access can be limited to the single resource. For advanced security, controls can be placed on the range of commands they're allowed to perform. Should additional privileges be required, these can be requested via a workflow ticket. The approval of the ticket would grant immediate but temporary privilege to run additional commands on the database. And then last but not least, it's about auditing everything, meaning not just for governance and compliance purposes, but also for forensic purposes. So I know this was a lot of information, and seeing is believing, so let's move over to Tony, who will really demonstrate how secure access for remote admins and third-party vendors will work. Tony?
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Torsten. Hello, everybody. This is Tony. And so we've got a nice demo coming up. In this demo, we have a couple of fictitious companies. As you see on the screen, one is called acmeIT.com, This is an outsourced IT company, and they manage a variety of IT systems for one of their customers, Banzai.com. So for this demo, we're going to step into the shoes of an Acme consultant by the name of Albus Admin, and we're going to watch as he performs his daily job. Now, specifically, he manages some Windows and Linux servers for Banzai, and so we'll see how he does this. He's going to log into Banzai's privileged access service, the one provided by Centrify, and from there, he's going to establish remote login sessions to those servers. Now, once he's on the servers, we'll see Centrify Privilege Elevation in action, constraining what he's allowed to do on those servers. And across both of those Centrify systems, we'll see the authentication service prompt him for MFA when appropriate. So with that, let's get on with the demo.
Okay, let me just share my demo screen here. And so just to set the stage here, I'll be floating through a couple of windows. This one is the main one. This is the one that Albus, the outsourced IT administrator, will be using in order to conduct his business. So here I'm going to log in as Albus. We're at the identity provider, acme.com. Albus admin at acmeit.com, if I can spell. Okay. So here we see the first example of multi-factor authentication. So certainly at the IDP, you want to be able to prompt an administrator as a best practice for a second factor of authentication. So I'll enter my password, and let's select a second factor. You can see multiple second factors of authentication here that are all based on what he is enrolled to be able to use. So here I'm going to use the FIDO U2F security key. So I have a YubiKey plugged into the USB port on my laptop. So I will select that, click Next, and then I will press the button, and I think I might have got my password wrong. Let me try that again. albusadmin@acmeit.com, 523, and let's try that again. It's always fun doing this live. And authentication was successful. So I managed to fat finger my password right at the start of the demo. All right, so as Albus here, I'm logged into my IDP. This is my dashboard. What I've been asked to do is actually log into Banzai's servers and perform some administrative activities. So I'm going to do a federated login to Banzai's password vault. And here on the dashboard, I have an icon that represents that application. What it will do is it will do a federated single sign-on to the Banzai system, SAML-based federated single sign-on. Here we are, we're logged in now to the Banzai system as the administrator. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do first is, first of all, note that as an individual user logged into the Centrify vault here, my activities and what I'm allowed to do is constrained by roles. So you'll see here down on the left is my menu of things I'm allowed to do. And I'm just going to put this window side by side with another window, which is an administrative window. On the left, we see a full administrator, and you can see there's a lot more capabilities in the menu. That's because, again, Albus on the right here is constrained by his role as to what he's allowed to see and do. If I actually go into the list of users, and if I select Albus from the list here, let me just open this up. There's Albus. And I look at his roles, you'll see very simply, he has a limited user role, which is what helps dictate his ability to perform functions within the password vault. If I go back and I look at the cloud administrator role, here you will see that he has, in his list of roles, he has full system administrator access. So this is just the first point, is that we're constraining Albus's capabilities within the vault based on his role-based access control. All right. Let's go back to Albus's screen here. Let me just expand that screen once again. So we federated in. One thing to note here is that Banzai doesn't need to manage Albus's identity. Because we're using SAML-based federation, his identity is managed over at the other side, over at Acme. Anyway, let's get on to business. So I will navigate to the list of systems that are available to me. These are ostensibly Windows, Linux, Unix servers, potentially network devices as well. But for this demonstration, what we want to do is we want to log into this Windows server, this member server, to be able to perform some administrative tasks. So I'll right-click on that, get the contextual menu up, and I will get the list of accounts available to me. And here we see them. Now, we also see role-based access control at play here as well, because there's a lot more accounts here associated with the server, but these are the only ones that are visible to me. These two at the bottom, I could log into immediately, but you'll notice a lock icon next to the other two. These two, should I want to log in as the administrator, for example, would require me to explicitly request access and have that access approved by one or more administrators or managers. Anyway, let's choose the Outsourced IT Albus account. I will double tap that, and I am immediately logged in. Now, a few things to note about this. Number one, going back to what Torsten was saying in his part of the presentation, this is VPN-less remote access. So we're not using a VPN in order to log into the server. As such, we're not attached to the network physically. This is a browser-based session. So I'm not incurring the risks associated with using a VPN, which is potentially being logged into a jump box, getting exposed to the broader network where I could potentially move laterally to other systems. I've been surgically placed on this one specific server in order to do what I need to do. The other thing to mention is that the password was not revealed to me. The password is securely vaulted. And so it was the vault itself that logged me into that server using that account, but it injected the password in on my behalf. I don't know what that password is. So I'm not going to be able to go back outside and maybe in a circuitous way try and log in with this ID and password manually. All right. So given those benefits, let's move on. Let's look at how we can constrain Albus's activities within this Windows server. I've been logged in as an individual user, not as an administrator, which is a best practice for us. We want to constrain that user based on an individual identity that's fully accountable. If I try and run this application on the desktop, which is Centrify's Audit Analyzer application, it's a sensitive app. It contains a recording of all of the privileged sessions that have occurred throughout the last days and weeks. You can see here I don't have enough privilege. However, based on Centrify roles, I have actually been granted the ability to run this in an elevated way, so as an administrator. And we do that by right-clicking and saying Run with Privilege. So this will run this application now as an administrator because that role has been granted to me, and this is part of my job function. So everything is good. You can see here that the application ran without any problems. So that's an example of how we can constrain what Albus is allowed to do within a Windows environment. Let's exit from this, and what I will do is now move over to Red Hat Linux as a different environment where we can do similar kinds of things. So here on Red Hat Linux, I will right-click in a similar fashion and get a list of accounts that are available to me. Now, I do want to log in as root, but I'll come to that in a moment. That requires access request. First, I'll use exactly the same Active Directory account that I just used to log into Windows. We have the ability within Centrify of being able to use AD accounts to log into any managed resource from Centrify. So I will double-click on that. And once again, you see here is a VPN-less window, but there is a difference. Here we've decided to demonstrate the use of multi-factor authentication to better assure Albus's identity. But this is at the credential provider level. So this is at the server level. And here again, I have a number of different factors at my disposal. This is a different list. And that's because we have the ability of managing what types of second factors are presented at different points when we do multi-factor authentication, whether it's at login to the vault, checking out a password, in this case, doing a remote session to the target server, or even on privilege elevation. So for this one, I will use my phone, and I will hit Call Me.
Pressing the pound or hash key.
Okay, let me hit the pound or hash key.
You successfully authenticated using Centrify. You may hang up now. Goodbye.
Okay, so as you can see, I was automatically logged in. I didn't have to transcribe a PIN or anything of that nature. So now that I'm actually logged in to this Linux box, I know in the audience we'll probably have a few administrators there who are familiar with Centrify's privilege elevation for Linux. So let me just show you that I have a number of roles already pre-assigned to me as an administrator that allow me to elevate privilege. So I will issue the dzdo-l command, where dzdo, if you're unfamiliar, is our equivalent of sudo. I will enter my password. And maybe I'll enter my password again. Having some fun with my fingers today. So there you see the list of commands that Albus can run with privilege. Normally you can't run these. So for example, here we have an interesting one. cGetAccount is an API call to the Centrify password vault. So if I was a developer and I was writing code and I wanted to include a user ID and password in my code, but not have that exposed where hackers could actually sniff that, I can do a call to that cGetAccount API in order to retrieve that password in real time within the code, and that way it's not exposed. So let's just run that. cGetAccount, let's type FM Red Hat 1, which is the server that this account is associated with, and I'm trying to get the Acme generic, I cannot spell today, account from the vault. And as you can see, it requires root. So I need to elevate with the appropriate password. If I was an attacker, I would be stuck at this point. But I can do dz-do and repeat that command. And now we're actually off talking to the vault. But note here, privilege elevation. So we can selectively apply MFA on privilege elevation for commands that we consider to be more sensitive than others. In this case, let me use my phone again. We'll do an SMS message. And I have SMS messages also coming to my laptop here. So there it is. It appeared in the background. I'll click on that. There's the link. Let me click on the link. And I should be able to approve. That was successful. And now let me just go back to my window and hit return. And I can display the password from the vault. So that was an example of a number of things. One is application-to-application password management, where we're removing hard-coded passwords from within code. We were also elevating privilege using Centrify roles to make sure that I'm actually allowed to perform this function. And the third thing that you didn't see that's under the covers is the server, the actual machine that I'm on here, Red Hat 1, needs to be granted sufficient privileges in order to check out the password on behalf of the user. So we kind of have two levels of authorization at that point. So that was interesting. As you can see further up in when I did the dz-do -l, we can do other functions as well. So I'd like to show you some other capabilities where we can do some better validation of the user. I can VI the etc sudoers file. If I try to VI etc sudoers regularly, again, I don't have the permission to do that, but I can elevate privilege. So let's do dz-do of that. And now, as you can see, I'm able to edit the sudoers file. Now, if I was an attacker or even as a legitimate outsourced IT individual, this is a very sensitive file. We might have wrapped MFA around that, but I've already demonstrated that. So what we're demonstrating now is something a little different. And I'll explain to you what's happening under the covers. Let me pull up my Slack window here and shrink it off to the right so that we can see both windows at once. So there's my Slack window, and here's my session. Now, let me just clear all of these new messages out of the way. Under the covers, we have advanced monitoring that's looking at certain commands that are being issued by quote-unquote legitimate users. In this case, we're monitoring for VI etc sudoers. And our analytics product is looking for those activities, and it's able to communicate with the Slack service here that you see on the right in order to alert an IT security administrator that there may be something sensitive going on that he should check out. Now, while that is happening, I'm just going to leave that in place. I'm going to take a slight tangent here and go back to my password vault. And I'm going to demonstrate for you the final part of what I wanted to show, which is access request. And we will come back to that Slack notification in a minute while it's being delivered. So here, I want to log in as root. If I double click on this, you'll see that it's not opening up a session window. It's asking me to request access. So I'll say I'm a legitimate, can't spell, but that's okay, user wanting to log in. So I will submit that. Now, under the covers, this is going into workflow, and I've allowed or set up the administrator, the cloud administrator, to be the recipient of that workflow-based request, and to be able to grant or deny that access. So let me switch over to, and you can see an email just popped in saying, Centrify Account Access Manager, you have an account login request. So let me pop over to the administrator's view here, and I will go to my requests list. And if I reorder that by date, up at the top is the pending request. So I'll double click on that, and you can see that is my bad spelling, but that is the request that I just submitted. Obviously I could reject it, but I'm going to approve it. I also have the opportunity of massaging this to make it permanent versus time-based, but I will submit that. So again, let's going back into workflow. The appropriate roles and time-bound permissions are being established. So if I now go back to my other user here, Albus, I go back to Red Hat 1, I right-click, get a list of requests, of accounts, and there's the root account. Notice the lock icon has disappeared. So now I'm able to double-click on that and get access to that server. Again, we put MFA around this. I'm not going to go into this MFA again, but suffice to say we've already demonstrated that. But this was an example of workflow-based access request and approval, again, for the root account login. All right, so now let me go back to finish off my prior example. Open up Slack, and here you see at the bottom, we see the latest notification here. DZDo granted for command user bin VI. So as an IT security administrator, I may look at this and say, well, outsource IT doesn't normally do that kind of stuff. Let me take a look at this event in the analytics portal. And I can do all of this from this same interface, which is really convenient. So I click on the analytics portal, and we will be put into the analytics portal dashboard. And down at the bottom is all of the list of current events. And here we will see a number of different events associated with this privilege elevation. So I could look at this, I could right-click and get a session timeline that basically collects all of the related events for this particular session in one place, all the way from the PAN-based login to the Linux box, all the way through to the security alert here. And you'll notice here in the link above here, session recording. We're actually recording this session in real time, and there's a link here that I can use to click in order to get to that. But I'm just going to go back to my Slack to show you that I can also get to it from here. It's nice to have everything conveniently in one interface. So I click on recorded session, and up pops this window where I can open that recorded session. So this allows me now to get a better sense of what Albus was up to from the point of login to the point of this anomaly detection. So I can get this kind of context that's normally not available to me. And I can look at this and I can say, well, whatever he's been doing is probably fairly innocuous. I'm okay with this. But I want to look a little bit deeper into what he's been up to. So let me close this out and go back to my Slack session. Let's look at him in real time. Let's see if he's up to something else nefarious that might give me cause for concern. So here we're opening up a live window into his session. Let me pull up his session window. There it is. Let me move this off to the side so that we can get a better view. So in this small window is Albus's real session. As you can see, whatever he types in, you can see in the live window. So I, as an IT security administrator, would be able to watch him and observe and say, yeah, maybe he is up to no good in actual fact. I want to do something about this. So let me close this monitor session, go back to Slack, and then you'll see under remediation here, we have the option to terminate his session. In fact, let me make sure that I have his session open here. All right, there we go. So if I click on terminate session and I select the session, you'll see now that we're processing the request here in the window. And with any luck, in a couple of seconds, that session is now being terminated. So what we've demonstrated here, as an alternative to gating Albus using MFA, we've got under the covers analytics and real-time monitoring, interfacing with Slack in this case, and giving the IT security administrator the ability to investigate as well as remediate should the need arise. So that kind of wraps up the demonstration that I wanted to provide of showing how we can make sure that we manage outsourced IT, what they're allowed to do, how we can really mitigate our risks associated with that form of remote access. Torsten.
Thank you, Tony. Great demo. I think a lot of things to take away, how to secure remote access for your own admins or for your third-party vendors. So to summarize our session today, to minimize the risk associated with remote access threats, organizations should implement 6 steps. That's your best practices. Number 1, federate access. Number 2, apply MFA, multi-factor authentication, everywhere. Then do password checkouts and rotations. And use targeted VPN-less access. And apply access requests for just-in-time privilege. And as always, audit everything for governance and compliance purposes. So I hope you really learned a lot of new things. I hope you got interested in the Centrify Zero Trust Privilege solution. Thank you.